everyone. We are so excited to join you today in conversation for the EdCollab gathering. My name is Dr. Tracey Flores, and I am an assistant professor at the University of Texas at Austin. And I am a former classroom teacher for 8 years in schools across Glendale and Phoenix, Arizona. And right now at UT Austin, I am a teacher educator where I teach literacy courses in our teacher education program. I teach language arts methods and a community literacy course. And I am really excited to be here today with my colleague, Jessi Murdter-Atkinson, and she'll introduce herself.
Hi, I am newly Dr. Jessi Murdter-Atkinson. I recently finished the PhD program at UT Austin, and this fall I will be starting as an assistant professor at the University of North Texas. I also was a classroom teacher for 15 years, teaching grades kindergarten through 5th grade in Austin in Central Texas. And then I was an instructional coach in Round Rock ISD. And then more recently, I've transitioned to working with pre-service teachers with Dr. Flores, teaching language arts methods, community literacy, and reading methods. And I'm also very excited to be here with you today.
And so this conversation, our presentation, stems from our work in the classroom as K-6 teachers, as well as our work in alongside pre-service teachers in our methods courses. And the name of our conversation today is Name Study, Literacy Learning that Builds Relationships and Honors Comunidad. And we want to start by talking a little bit about the importance of names and naming. And we brought together, as we were preparing for this conversation, different texts, children's literature, young adult literature, spoken word poetry, in which the authors of the text talk about the importance of names and naming, and the importance of our names, the importance that our names hold for us, and the stories that they hold. And many of these stories are rooted also in very personal experiences for the writers, for the authors. And we wanted to bring these stories, these voices into the conversation as we think about names and name studies and these rituals and routines that we set up in our classrooms, because historically and also present day, many of us have encountered erasure in our names through mispronunciation, as well as with people changing our names many times, sometimes without consent, or we feel like we have to change our name in order for other people's comfort, or for other people's comfort. And our names are important and they're special. They are what our parents give to us. Sometimes they're names of our ancestors, of our elders that are given to us as to honor and to celebrate their legacy. They hold special cultural meaning, their relationships to our family. And they also are very much linked to our identity and how we walk in the world. And so as we talk about names and name study today, we just invite you to think about, your own name and the stories that it holds, and also the work that you do in your classroom, and how centering students' names and centering their culture, language, and identity is really, really important in our work as teachers. And in name study is a really powerful way in which we can build community with our students and begin to really study deeply what each of their names means and the history that it holds for them.
And so we'll talk about how we came to name study. And so many, many years ago, when I was still a classroom teacher, I went to a literacy institute at the Teachers College Reading and Writing Project. And I was I can't remember if it was the large or small group session with Rachel Rothman, and she introduced me to name study. And so it was something that I brought back to the classroom, that I used across grade levels as a way to build community, a way to learn about students and who they are, and the names and the stories they tell around their names, as well as to embed some really rich literacy skills within. And so I drew on this practice in my classroom teaching. And then I also coached around name study as a literacy coach. And then this is a picture from the pre-service context, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And so as a teacher educator, it's something that we've also brought into our literacy methods courses, which is what you see here. And you can see that we've asked our pre-service teachers to join us in our gathering space as a community to really engage in name study together. And then on the right-hand side, you see a picture of like where we've really documented this practice, and we've documented our shared message together that we co-constructed and recorded. And then it's visible in the classroom all throughout the semester as a way to really build community and learn about one another.
And one thing that's really powerful in the work that I've been so privileged to do alongside Dr. Murdter-Atkinson is the ways in which we bring our teaching practices from our own experiences into the classroom and really model it for our pre-service teachers in the hopes that they'll take it up in their own classrooms as well. And so, like Dr. Murdter-Atkinson said, we really engage in, let's come to the floor, you know, and now we're going to put up your name. And it's, our classroom becomes a living, it becomes a living space for all of us with all of the work that we're doing. So I really love that we did this together.
Me too.
And so as we were talking about inviting the students to come into the floor, into the learning space together, to bring them forward and to really lean into teaching, we really thought about the work of Ralph Peterson and his book, Life in a Crowded Place, Making a Learning Community. And this is a book that I read when I was a pre-service teacher at Arizona State University. Karen Smith brought Ralph Peterson's work into my life. And he talks about the importance of ceremony, ritual, and rite in a learning community so that everyone is bringing their knowledge to the space, so that everyone is coming together in a way that is meaningful and in a way that really builds community and builds autonomy. And specifically, I pulled a quote in this conversation to think about the importance of ceremony. And he writes, "But ceremony becomes very important when students are expected to construct meaning on their own and with others. Assuming responsibility for their own learning and not merely acting out someone else's plan calls upon students to focus their attention. Where study is concerned, ceremony brings about an internal readiness, pushing aside that which might interfere and helping students to participate wholeheartedly by concentrating thought and feeling on the work at hand." And so when we think about name study and the way that we come to name study, not only with our, in K-6 spaces, but with our pre-service teachers, we really want to honor the space, the learning space, as a way to center their names, as a way to center the learning, and as a way to uplift the stories that are part of their names and their own stories as well. And so we wanted to invite Ralph Peterson's name into words into this space as well, as we think about the different ceremonies we create in our classroom and the rituals and routines that become part of our learning, and the way that we live together, and the way that we learn together, and the way that we move about together throughout the year, throughout each day.
And so we'll talk a little bit about what name study is and why we engage in name study. And so name study is both a literacy learning activity as well as a way to build community and really center each child or each student within that community. It puts meaning first. It gives names give ownership, and they often are one of the first words that a child learns to read, and a child learns to write, and a child learns to recognize and print. And so this really important thing becomes one of the first things that we study as a community together in a classroom. Name study also gives children an opportunity to ask and answer questions, and we'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But it gives children a way to hear more about their peers and really learn more about them and the things that they like to do and the things that are important to them. And within name study, as educators, we can embed a lot of important work. We can embed a lot of important literacy work around letters and word work and phonemic and phonological awareness. And we can also make other content area connections across our day through subject areas like math or social studies or even science. And so while I'll share a few of the ways that we've embedded name study in our contexts, please know that this is not an inclusive list. And it also evolves over time. It's responsive to the students that we're working with. And so these are just a few of the ideas that we have tried out in our classrooms and would like to share with you. And so through name study, one of the ways that we can learn about our names is to ask students or children to sign in as they come into the classroom each day. And this could also be a way to see who's present in the classroom that day. And it's just important to note here that while we ask children to sign their name, it's okay if it's not conventional. It can also be used as an informal assessment to sort of see where they are and meet them where they are. But we wouldn't ask them to erase it and try again. So they can sign in as they come in. We can also embed names throughout a shared reading through song and poetry. We can include children's names in the songs and poems we read together as a community. Sometimes teachers like to bind those together in a book and add that book to the classroom library where students would get lots of practice seeing and reading those names time and time again. And then the ask and answer questions. And so one of the ways that we've utilized name study is we study 1 or 2 names a day. And so it really depends on you and what your daily schedule looks like, whether you can study 1 name a day or multiple names a day. But let's say that we're studying 1 name for the day. We would ask that student, we're really going to shine a light on that student, and we're going to ask them some questions to get to know them better. And in the younger grades, we can keep the questions simple, and we can ask, what's something you like to do at school? And what's something you like to do at home? And when the child responds, let's say the child says, I like to read at school, the teacher could repeat that back and then record it onto chart paper. And this is an opportunity to teach some one-to-one correspondence, teaching the difference between a word versus a sentence, and then repeating that back and then recording it. Sometimes you can count the words in the sentence and then make a line or a blank. Let's say there's 5 words in that sentence, you draw 5 lines, and then your words would go in those 5 lines. Again, teaching that word correspondence. There's lots of word study work you can do in name study. Along with recognizing names, we can clap syllables in our names. We can pay attention to the first and last letters. We can also pay attention to the initial and final sounds in our friends' names and in our names, and think about what else might begin with those letters or what else might end with those letters. In math, a really simple thing to do is to count the letters or to count the syllables in a name. And then one of our favorite things to do is to make a class book. And so if we're recording from that ask and answer questions sort of section, we can have a page for each person in our class. And the teacher could easily type up that page, and then the student could illustrate it, and then we could put it together to make a class book that lives on in our classroom library. And then anytime that we're composing like that, we can always compose orally, giving our students an opportunity to orally rehearse a lot before we commit it to print. And these are a few examples. In this example to the left, you can see that the classroom teacher, this is from a pre-K classroom and with a teacher that I had worked with previously, and she organized them alphabetically, and then she drew circles around, like, these are the names that begin with A, and these are the names that begin with B, to start drawing those distinctions. And then in this middle picture, again, organized alphabetically, and we can see that in the places like B, maybe, where no one in the class's name begins with B, but they went ahead and drew a balloon there, or a cat for C, so that every letter is represented. And then in the last picture is the name sign-in, again from a pre-K classroom. And you'll notice that not all of the names are written conventionally, but that's okay, because this tells us a lot about what these writers know about their name and know about the letters that are in their name, and how their name looks on paper. And so we've also thought about ways that this could look across classrooms, pre-K through sixth. And so this is a routine or a ritual, as Dr. Flores mentioned, that is very easy to adapt in different spaces based on the needs of your readers and writers. And so if the students that you work with already know how to write their names, then they could come in and write their name on a sentence strip and add it to a pocket chart. And then there's all different kinds of activities that you could do with those sentence strips. The students could work on alphabetizing the names. They could work on rhyming or different alphabet games. And so they could be looking at the pocket chart of names, and as a teacher you could give a lot of clues, like I'm thinking of a name that has 5 letters and it begins with the sound s and it rhymes with ham, or that actually is 3 letters, but you get the idea.
Get it out first, right?
Yes. And then in that ask and answer questions part, the question that the teacher asks the children could be more sophisticated as children get older. It could also be an opportunity for older children to compose their own questions that they want to ask a peer, and then they're practicing asking and then listening to those responses. And so we would encourage whatever age group it is, even in higher ed spaces, that you still make a class book or a class quilt with the names represented as a way to really build community and hold space for each other's names.
I really appreciate that. I think about the importance of the planning, some of those activities, because I've gotten like in the moment, like, oh, and then you're off.
Yes, it's real life.
Did that on purpose.
Yes.
And so Dr. Murdter-Atkinson just talked about the work in K-6 spaces and how we modeled this for our pre-service teachers. And when we were designing our language arts methods course, and we talked about the name study, bringing it into the space as an activity to build community, but also like a way to show them the way that literacy learning can take place outside the reading block, outside the writing block, and can be part of your morning meeting or an after lunch activity. Like it's something, doesn't have to be a 45-minute lesson. It can be something that you do in meaningfully in 10 minutes or less, if, you know, as you're the instructional leader of your classroom. And so we really modeled a lot for our students. We modeled at the beginning of the semester the routine of name study, the way that we would write the name and then count the letters and look at for the syllables, and then think about the beginning letter and the end sound. And we kind of scaffolded it for them. And then we were asking them the questions and counting the words, and we scaffolded this and modeled it. And then eventually the pre-service teachers started to take over the name study, which is what we really hoped for. And it happened because we talked about, this is a space for you to try. We're here to coach you. You know, we're all learning this together, and we learn from how we each engage in this practice. And so you'll see one of our pre-service teachers there leading the name study, and Dr. Murdter-Atkinson had been coaching the teachers as they were going. And so it was really, you know, all the things happening at once in a really beautiful and generative space where we also gave each other feedback. And then again, you see the door with the documentation of the names that we had studied. And so as we were working with pre-service teachers too, we also had them, before we even engaged in name study and the modeling and what it was and the purpose, we had them explore their own name stories and the meaning behind their names, if they liked their name, if they didn't like their name, how people read them because of their name. We really dug into conversations about their names and their importance of the story that they hold. And so we wanted to show you the invitation into name study that started first with their names. And so on the next slide, we're gonna go through what the invitation looked like. And so we brought in the words of Audre Lorde, who talks about the importance of defining yourself. And she says, if I didn't define myself for myself, I would be crunched into other people's fantasies for me and eaten alive. And we shared this quote with the pre-service teachers as an entry point into thinking about our names and our name stories. And we had a discussion. What does this mean? I talked a little bit about who Audre Lorde is and was, and how she encourages us to break our silences and through our name stories, that this is one way that we can do that. And so after discussion about this quote, we then moved into looking at some different texts. And we listened to Elizabeth Acevedo read from the Poet X, the poem Names, about the main character, Xiomara, and how people mispronounce her name at school and what her name means to her, and how her parents named her to mean one thing, but for her, it means something completely different. And we had the text there for them to look at, as well as listen to Elizabeth Acevedo perform this. And we gave them some time to discuss it. And then we layered on another text. So here's the poem that we pulled from the book. And then we layered on another text. And we pulled in My Name from The House on Mango Street by Sandra Cisneros. And we read this in English, we read it in Spanish, and we discussed, so what is this about? What is Esperanza talking about? What does her name mean to her? And we talked about the women who she was named after and how she had a tension with her name because she didn't want to inherit that space at the window, like so many women that she knows, and the story of her grandmother, who she never really, got to fully know and fully understand. And we read this in English and Spanish, and we talk about, gender and culture within this piece as well. We discuss it, and then we brought in one more text because we wanted to look at different pieces together and put them into conversation. And then here it is in Spanish. And then we brought in, we didn't read the whole thing, but I gave the students the link. We talked about Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson and how she talked about her name and what her name meant to her, how her parents named her, and how she carries that with her with pride and with honor into everything that she does. And it's part of her story and part of her roots. And so we talked about this and we discussed it. And then we invited the students into some writing. And we asked them to think about, what is your name story? Who named you? Are you named after anyone? What memories do you have about your name? Do you like your name? Why or why not? And what feelings does your name evoke? And we opened it up to however they would like to enter the conversation. They could write a narrative, they could write a poem, they could write a vignette, they could draw a picture and label it. We really just wanted to also think about writing expansively and to, be very broad about it. And they all shared very different stories based on who they were and who they were becoming and how they feel about their name. And, some of them talked about being named after relatives. Some of them talked about constantly having their name mispronounced in different spaces and how that made them feel, but also how they are reframing these experiences too. There was a lot of reframing on some of their name stories. And then we talked about what this means for our own practice as well. What does this mean for our work as classroom teachers? How can we ensure that we are really honoring students' name, really being learners of our students' experiences, and how we can work on ourselves to ensure that we don't cause unintentional harm. And it was some really good conversations. And then this launched us into name study. So we started with their names first, and then each of them, we studied their names as a learning community. And so we wanted to show how we built this into our writing, our language arts methods course by first honoring their stories and then working in the routines of name study around their names. And so we've shared a lot in in our time together. And we're really hoping that you see connections to your own classroom and that you're seeing the connections between K-20 spaces. In K-12, in the literacy learning that you scaffold for your students in the different ways that they're thinking about letters and sounds and rhyming. And then also in teacher education spaces where we can continue to support students in reframing their own experiences, honoring their experiences, but then also thinking about how these practices can be part of their own classroom work too, and how we've modeled these for them. We don't just throw them in there. We model just like you would in K-12 spaces. It doesn't, we know this is good, this is important teaching, and we need to model this for our students. And so we wanted to leave you with a question. Now that we've talked about the different ways that educators can use name study in K-12 and teacher preparation spaces, how might you draw on name study in your own learning community? And so what might be one aspect that you could take up, or how might you expand what you're already doing? Because we know you're doing a lot of really important work already. And we hope that we gave you some ideas that you might try. What are you thinking right now, Miss Dr. Murdter-Atkinson?
Well, as you were talking about how this was work that we did in our language arts methods, and I was thinking about how we did it across a couple of different semesters with different groups of students, but it was often really generative in terms of just the storytelling around names and also learning about each other. But and it provided, I feel like, a healing space too for some students as they were reflecting on that at the end of the semester. But what I was thinking about too was that while we did it in language arts methods, there are aspects of it, I feel like, because I'll be teaching reading methods in the fall, there are aspects of it that I certainly could pull into a reading focused course like that, because there's a lot of skills and strategies in that built into that too.
No, I completely agree with you. This semester, after, like we've talked about, we work with many students at UT around name study. With my current group of students that I'm working with, my cohort, I pulled in them bringing in an artifact to share. So kind of like show and tell. They bring an important object to tell a story that represents them. And so then that lends itself to oral storytelling. And then they ask each other questions about the object or the story. And then we jump into the activities. And the students have brought like posters from their bedroom, and like one of my students brought her grandmother's pearl necklace, like just really beautiful stories that of these special people in their lives, that these artifacts remind them of, or important moments.
I love that.
And then it also has us think about writing more expansively as well. And I teach 2 classes with my students, and so I'm doing it across classes intentionally so they can see like this isn't just for writing. This is part of how we live and learn together, and it's part of our ceremony.
Right. It can live across spaces.
Absolutely. Yes. We have some resources we'd like to share with you too before our time is up. We put some of books here that we've drawn on to think about building community and to think about the literacy learning that happens in our classrooms. And so there's the Ralph Peterson book, and then we love Being the Change. It really lends itself to community building at the beginning of the year, and throughout the entire year, in the ways that we think about our identity and also the importance of centering identities. And then We've Been Doing It Your Way Long Enough is a really powerful book that shows the different ways that we can engage in culturally sustaining pedagogies across the school day.
And I would say that We've Got This. It does that as well. It thinks about the different ways that we as educators can engage in culturally sustaining practices across our day and across our school year, and how we can really attend to the interests and needs and identities of the learners that we work with.
And then just a few more from the reading teacher, La Historia de mi Nombre, a culturally sustaining early literacy practice. I highly encourage you to take a look at this if you haven't yet. Kendall Nash, Leah Panther, and Alicia Arce Boardman wrote about their classroom practice in which they honor students' names and stories and birthdays. And it's a really powerful way to think about centering our students in the classrooms in different ways.
And this is a tool that Dr. Flores and a guided observation tool or a coaching tool that we developed, and it's changed too over the past couple semesters, but we developed it for our pre-service teachers, so that as they're observing us model name study, we're sort of guiding that observation and pointing them to the specific things that the teacher or that we're doing and saying. And it's just a place to record that learning so that they can refer to it a little bit later on. So if you're in a coaching space, you could use a tool like this for guided observation.
And it was really helpful in the work that we did with the teachers. They pulled it out a lot when we were modeling when they were also going up there as they were thinking about their facilitating the lesson.
Mm-hmm. And while we gave them a place to record their notes and observations, they also had a space on this form to record like they're thinking about it. So what are they wondering about what we're doing? Or where are places maybe where they would have questions around it or want to push back? Because we're open to those conversations too. And so we would always debrief after each time we modeled and then had a guided observation. Then we would have conversation around what they were seeing and what they were thinking.
And thank you. We just want to thank you again for taking time out of your weekend, out of your afternoon to engage in this conversation with us. And if you have any questions, we invite questions. That's what I want to say. You can send us messages on Twitter, and we just really hope that you found some kind of gem that you could take with you into the classroom. And we also just want to thank you for everything that you do every single day for all of our young people across the country, because you matter a lot. So thank you.
Absolutely. And the work you do is really important. So thank you.
Adios.
Bye.